Keep in touch with the Wolf Connection podcast on our Instagram handle at the Wolf Connection Pod, or email us your questions, comments, and guest ideas to podcast@wolfconnection.org. Thank you for your support, and howls to you all. Welcome to the Wolf Connection podcast. I'm your host, John Calvin. So it was our pleasure to meet this young individual at the Yellowstone Wolf Summit when we were in Gardner, Montana. He is currently a student at Cal Poly Humboldt, a sophomore, in fact, who's majoring in wildlife management and conservation. He is there really in tune with everything that's going on with wolves at the current moment. His name is John Marchwick. John, it's a pleasure to meet you and really looking forward to diving into your story. How are you doing today?
I'm doing good. Thank you for having me, and I hope you're doing well as well.
Yeah, I'm doing great. It's a little warm here in California, but that's to be expected this time of year. I know you're in Montana at the moment. I believe you're probably on break from school.
Yeah.
So when do you actually head back to Cal Poly?
I start school again August 21st.
Okay. All right. So you have a little bit of time to still be in and around Yellowstone, so you can hang out in the nice wilderness areas, right?
Yeah, pretty remote wilderness.
That's great.
Currently.
Yeah, that's great. I love that. And the reason, for those of you that are listening, that we heard about John's story while we were at the summit, and it's really quite captivating. And John, I'll let you explain most of it, but just for a little bit of background here, your family here, 6th generation Montanan on your father's side, 5th generation Montanan on your mom's side.
Yeah.
And so you grew up in the Greater Yellowstone area. Talk about what that was like. You're in a ranching community, differing opinions on wolves. Just give everyone a background about your growing up period and what that was like in that area, in a ranching community, and also the perceptions around wolves with your family and yourself included.
Well, so growing up in the Greater Yellowstone, I spend a lot of my time in the outdoors, as most people here probably know. It's a great place to get out and explore the outdoors. And I grew up outside of Bozeman. My family had a house on Leverage Lane for a long time that we recently sold. And I went to school in Bozeman, but a lot of the time I was in the Paradise Valley, Livingston, Gardner area because of our cabin that we have in the Greater Yellowstone, which does have wolves, mountain lions, grizzlies, so all the apex predators pretty much. And my views on wolves, it's funny because a lot of people, when they met me, they've always thought I've cared about wolves right away or my whole life, and that's not really necessarily true. I, for a long time, was very anti-wolf, and I grew up in a very, very anti-wolf family. And while we weren't ranchers or necessarily hunters like ourselves, my dad was a former hunter, and my dad's side of the family were former sheep ranchers up by Big Timber. And on my mom's side, because we grew up in the Paradise Valley area, we knew a lot of ranchers, and we just did not have really great views on wolves. And initially, how my views began, or when I was starting to hear really negative information about wolves, started about when I was 7. So that would have been in 2011, 7 going on 8 years old. And for some brief context, I'm sure many people are aware of this, that wolves in Montana, the federal government, was trying and did successfully delist wolves from the Endangered Species Act in 2011. So that's when specifically it came up. And I don't really remember how it started one day, but I remember my mom, my dad, all my grandparents, all our family friends really just hammered me with anti-wolf misinformation. And I'll just use my mother for example. She said, I don't know what you've heard, but this is how it is. they're killing all the elk in Paradise Valley. And she also said that those wolf lovers over there in Yellowstone will tell you there was no wolves prior to the introduction, and that's wrong. She and essentially that was the initial response from what I got from my mom from wolves. And then I decided to ask my other family members what if they all thought the same thing. And sure enough, they all had very different negative perceptions about wolves. My grandmother on my mom's side called the wolf introduction to Yellowstone a mess, and she hated wolves because she was convinced that they had killed off all the moose in Yellowstone. And because over the last several decades, I believe there has been a decline in moose populations in the park. It's not been confirmed if wolves did it or have had something to do with that decline. But my grandmother and also my grandfather on my dad's side were both convinced that wolves were killing off all the moose in the park. And another big thing in sort of like in Chico, Prey, and like Emigrant in that area before wolves showed up, sheep ranching was a very huge economic industry. And when wolves did show up, locals were pretty severely impacted by uh, losses from sheep because of wolves. Like there was this ranching family that on my mom's side of the family, we were sort of acquaintances with a long time ago. And back in the late 1990s, shortly after wolves were reintroduced to Yellowstone, there was a couple that came from out of the park, I believe, is where they were from. And they were devastating their sheep, killing lambs, ewes, rams, and they had been using all these non-lethal methods, but the state was not keeping up with their compensation efforts to reimburse these ranchers, and no one believed that non-lethal methods were not working. So they actually started recording and taking videos of the wolves killing and attacking their sheep. And eventually they did get permitted a kill order. But by that point, when they killed the wolves that were killing all the sheep, they were so financially devastated and they had to switch from sheep to cattle. And that's something a lot of ranchers did after wolves showed up, was a switch from sheep to cattle. So that's a very huge reason why a lot of people around Prey, Emigrant, and Chico in that area, I just from what I found, did not like wolves because they had to change the type of livestock they've used to make a living for themselves and for their families.
I mean, back then, so at the young age of 7, when you're getting all of this information from your family members and the community that surrounds you, where is the information coming from for them? Was this handed down generationally in turn? Because if you're talking about 5, 6 generation Montanan, they've been there, I would imagine, close to the settlement of the West. Am I accurate in that, John?
Yeah.
That your family, yeah, was there for a while. So this was all information and myth, legendary things that have been passed down for quite some time, correct?
Yeah, it was passed out some time, and when it came to the Yellowstone wolves specifically, I think a lot of that spewed from propaganda shortly before and after wolves were brought back to Yellowstone, which I think even more so accelerated the sort of hatred on wolves and the very negative views on wolves that my family had and I grew up having.
What was it like for you? Was the hatred that specifically for you, that you had or felt, was it just because of the consistent hammering, I guess, of information that was coming from family, or did you witness any of the things that they were saying, or was it really a lot of hearsay? I just want to get the whole grasp for yourself because of the turnaround that we're going to get to that has happened for you and I think for some of your family members.
Yeah, it was a lot more of hearsay. I just went with what everyone said, I knew they knew a lot about the area, so I just was like, "Okay, I trust your judgment. I'll going by your word." So it was definitely a lot of hearsay and mainly from what other people were telling me versus my own opinions.
And it was that in those areas at that time, because we've talked with a lot of individuals who have been in Montana for a while, been around Idaho, Wyoming. Was there any sort of, because the story that you just shared before about the individuals that had the sheeping the sheeping farm, and I apologize if I messed that up, but for them to switch from sheep to cattle and there not being compensation, was that something else that was rubbing individuals the wrong ways? That there were promises of help for non-lethal, help for compensation, and that wasn't being funneled correctly by either the state or federal government? Were those things happening as well? I just want to get a
Yeah,
gauge on
like
that.
with the ranching family I mentioned, and I'm not saying names for privacy reasons,
Sure,
but
absolutely.
they that was a huge reason why they specifically don't like wolves. It was a lot of broken promises and that they weren't getting enough money to like help like funnel over like non-lethal methods, and the state especially was not keeping up with compensations because it was happening so quickly, and it just kept happening, and it wasn't changing the outcome. So that played a huge role as to why that ranching family specifically and their surrounding neighbors, why they really don't like wolves. And it's large, and it's something that I would say in my community where I grew up in, you know, they really never got over the wolf the wolves being brought back to Yellowstone, because it really changed everyone's lives in various different ways, like the switch from sheep to cattle. And no, a lot of these like ranching families in like Chico, Emigrant, Prairie, they're not rich, and a lot of them don't have like a good college educational background. A lot of these ranches were family owned, passed down, and they don't have college degrees. So, and ranching is pretty much all they've known their entire lives and know how to do. So, I think when that was threatened by wolves coming back, it was something a lot of these people for so long never had to deal with. And then one day they did. And I think another reason why there's such a strong hatred for them in my community was that they with when they brought the wolves to Yellowstone, that was never something that the locals here wanted. And it felt like they were ignored, unheard when the federal government did that. And so, ever since that pivotal life changing moment, and obviously, wolves have many beneficial reasons, like Yellowstone, according to a University of Montana 2022 economic study, wolf watching brings $82 million annually for the park. But as for these local ranching businesses outside of the park and these ranching families, um, I would say to them and to their perceptions, the wolves have brought way more harm than good from their perspectives.
And I think there's a lot of different reasons, I think, too, where that can be felt, and we've discussed a lot of this too, where if there's not a clear communication or a clear pathway to helping those individuals, those families, those who are ranching at the moment, that's in a lot of the ways of what we've heard and what we've seen is where people get upset, and rightfully so, is that if there is something that's being done and there's no communication back and forth about compensation, about ways to help, and I believe that has gotten better over time. At least from what I've seen, who we've spoken to in terms of when we're looking forward to Colorado having wolves reintroduced or introduced on that side, it seems as though those were a lot of the issues plaguing the Montana and Idaho reintroductions. Would you think that's true from your perspective, since you were there living that on the about a decade or so after that happened? Was that where a lot of the visceral reactions were coming from? Was it specifically just the animal, or was it just the way that things were done?
I think it was more so the way things were done as to how, and even somewhat the animal itself, because the animal was specifically the one that was impacting these ranchers' livelihoods. But how it was done too was largely the reason, I think, for why, at least where I live, the negative perception on wolves like really began. There was lack of communication, lack of resources, and they were not prepared enough and didn't, I don't think, did enough to help ranchers in our community financially. And they never did get over that because it affected their lives on a huge aspect. Going from sheep to cattle is not, it's not cheap, to make such a huge financial decision to when it comes to which livestock you're going to graze and make yourself a living off of. Um, So, and when the wolves did show up, another thing I think as far as lack of communication, in addition to lack of communication, I mean, there was also lack of education in that. Um, I guess from the ranching families I talked to, there were state officials or wildlife officials that told them, no, the wolves are going to stay in Yellowstone. You're not going to have to worry about this. It's not going to affect you. They're going to stay in the park. And as we all know, that did not happen. So there was a lot of broken promises and a lot that words that were not kept. And that's what really, I think, transpired a very strong hatred of wolves for where I grew up.
Yeah, it just seems like the transparency wasn't there from the official standpoint. And I mean, because again, if we look at it from human to animal, the animal is just trying to survive and trying to live and do its thing. And I think that's a lot of these problems. I'm sure that you're as you're studying, when you're looking at wildlife management and conservation and things of that sort, humans really are at the core problem, or the center core of a lot of these issues, is that we don't communicate with each other as well as we should, therefore leading to a lot of the issues that it's really a people problem as opposed to the animal being the problem. I mean, did you see when you were, until we get to, I'm staying in that 7 to 15 range because we're not at when you're changing your mind yet. Was that visceral hatred or just hatred in general? And I hate using the word hate, but the dislike, was that there for other predators like bears and mountain lions?
Yeah.
Or was it just, it was there for all of them? Okay. I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I did not like mountain lions. I wasn't the biggest fan of bears. I guess with like black bears it was sort of okay, but grizzlies was another no. And I will say grizzlies, it was more on a personal level because we have it because at our cabin we have a ranching family that's neighbors there. They own cattle, and there was a lot of issues they were having with, in particular, it was this male grizzly that was pretty troubled. It was going into their barn, it was killing their livestock, and it was actually, I chased one of the um I'm losing my train of thought here, but
It's okay.
because the couple owns it, and the wife was chased up a tree by this male grizzly that was very severely troubled. Now, that bear, as far as I know, isn't around anymore, but I will say that specifically had, again, why I didn't like grizzlies is so much was more about personal experience, whereas with wolves it was more hearsay. So it
We're
was
hearsay right now.
different things that caused me to have really negative views on predators in general.
Right. Yeah. It seemed that way with predator and individuals that we've spoken to like yourselves before this shift happens. It really seems that the hearsay and the bringing down of the culture through generations is really what has kept those negative feelings or thoughts alive. I want to touch on one more thing before we get to the switch for you at 15. what was the perception too in your mind that you remember also around, because you mentioned moose, but obviously the big linchpin were the elk, and that people to this day still believe that wolves and all these predators are declining the elk populations. They aren't thriving as much as they should be. Where was the focus, I guess, for your family? Because you said your dad what was a hunter. Your dad was
Was
in a
a
hunt,
hunter.
was a hunter. Yeah. So what was that like then for them? That was just, was that another? It just something else that piled on in terms of the negative effects of wolves and predators in general, or what was the reaction there for that in terms of elk?
Well, in the terms of elk, we were everyone was convinced that wolves were killing all the elk, but what really bothered them was everyone was convinced not only were the wolves killing them, but they weren't eating them. They just did it because they wanted to. And obviously, as I got older, I learned wolves did actually eat elk, but when I was younger, I never actually believed they did because I was told they only killed them because they wanted to, never because they were hunting for food. Because any time with like wolves was even mentioned for so long, I jumped to negative conclusions. Like, for example, this is this was over 10 years ago. uh the Lamar Canyon Alpha Female 926F, also known as Spitfire, was her name. She crossed the road in front of the vehicle I was in, um and that was May 2013. And I had one of those Coolplex cameras, and I could have taken her photo right there, then and there, and I didn't because I had convinced myself that that would be a waste of camera space. And that's something I still remember to this day because it was the first and last time I ever saw her because she was killed a few years later by a hunter outside of the park. But it's something I still remember. So basically, anything I heard about wolves, I just jumped to negative conclusions. And when something negative was happening to livelihoods or ungulates, I just always blame wolves because that's all I knew how to do, and that's what I was taught to do. Is that if the elk were declining, the wolves did it. If the moose are declining, the wolves did it. If the deer are declining, the wolves did it. So anything negative, I just associated it with wolves in terms of ranching and ungulate populations.
Yeah, and I can, and it's tough because when you're shaping young minds like yourselves, that gets ingrained. So now we get to that, and that's a, because it's wonderful that you say that portion of it too when you're talking about that wolf crossing in front of you, and it was the first and last time, because clearly that stuck with you even now. So tell me about OR 54 and what it was about that specific wolf that changed. It really changed everything for you, and obviously the path that you're on, and that you're moving through now. What was the experience, and how did that influence how everything changed for you?
So OR 54 was not was is still my favorite wolf to this day. And how I heard about her, because my dad works in California, and he called me, and this was the summer of 2018, and I was almost 15 years old at the time. But he said they're now here, and I asked him and to clarify, and I said, "What's here?" And he said, "There's a wolf at Lake Tahoe." And I knew exactly where that was because I have family and family friends in California as well. So, and while I'd never been to Lake Tahoe, I knew that was in California. And initially, I thought that has to be fake news. That's ridiculous. There's no wolves in California. But I Googled it, and sure enough, there she was, the gray wolf at Lake Tahoe. And another headline was Lake Tahoe has a rare tourist. She's a rare gray wolf. And I read and opened the articles. And initially, I thought, because again, I was taught to jump to negative conclusions. I was then thought, okay, someone brought her there then. Well, no, she made it there on her own. And then I was confused. Well, why is she there? Where does she come from? And then I learned she came from the Rogue Pack in Southwest Oregon. And initially, I was not impressed by them, and I'll sort of explain why that was specifically. But I had no idea wolves dispersed, and she had traveled like 300 something miles to get to Lake Tahoe from where she was previously living. So that was really struck me about her, just because with the Yellowstone wolf reintroduction, and this is how stupid I was. I was so convinced that they were so dumb that was why the federal government had to bring them there, because they were so stupid they couldn't get there on their own. So, which is so laughable, but that's genuinely what I believe. And here was this lone collared female in Lake Tahoe who got there by herself. And I didn't think wolves could travel that far. I didn't know wolves disperse. I didn't even know she got there by herself until I educated myself about it. And while I didn't necessarily change my mind right away about them, I was very interested by her specifically. So I ended up subscribing to California Department of Fish and Wildlife's wolf updates because I wanted to get every wolf update I could about her specifically. Because while she hadn't, well, she did impress me in a way, but I wasn't necessarily on board for wolves yet. But that was the start of when I got really curious about them.
Just for you to make that subscription to that webpage for the California Fish and Wildlife to get the updates, there clearly was a shift for you because it piqued your interest in a different way because like you said before, for the fact that you let a wolf go in front of your car, didn't take a photo of it, and now this time you hear about a wolf that's come from Oregon all the way to California for the first time, and you want to subscribe and learn all about that. Something there, it seemed like there was something that was buried inside of you that wanted to know about this animal, but you were trying very hard to suppress that, and you wanted to keep that in there, right?
Yeah, I tried, because that's what I was taught to do. If I had any moment where I thought, maybe that this wasn't as bad as it seemed with wolves, I just was like, no, I can't do that because that's not how you were raised. That's not what they are. At least that's what I thought they were meaning. Um, but and I guess with her specifically, I thought all wolves were the same, and she right away pretty much made it clear that she was very different. And this is a perfect example that I use all the time. Her pack in Oregon, the Rogue Pack, and going back to what I said earlier, why I was not impressed by them right away, was that I had read they had killed over like a dozen livestock back in like 2018. So they were killing cattle. And of course, all I kept thinking was, well, why didn't someone kill them? Like, because that's, again, I was taught to believe that the only good wolf really was a dead one. So, but in comparison, though, to OR 54, here was her parents back in Oregon killing a very high number of livestock in 2018. But when OR 54 was in California in 2018, the number of known predations she was implicated in was 0. So that right away really impressed me, because that it really made me like stop and think, and I was just like, wow, I guess wolves are different and not all the same, because I really didn't think they had different personalities. I was taught they were one thing, which was negative, bad, and couldn't possibly be anything else. But and it just really she really, what she did, and she never knew it because I never met her and she never met me, but she really challenged me to stop and think and go, wait, it like this is what was what I was taught to believe about wolves really that true? So it was essentially the start of the breaking down of the anti-wolf misinformation that I had grew up to believe for a very long time was when I was following her and really seeing her stand out as not what I was taught to believe or perceived wolves as.
So along this journey, as you start to break down the wall, as you say, or break down these barriers of negativity or the misconceptions that you have of this specific species of this animal in particular, what was it like in your family life as you start to maybe approach these conversations in a different light? How did those sorts of things go? Did they start right away? Was it sort of little pieces here and there? I would imagine you didn't just go full
No,
bore into into
no,
that. What
absolutely
was that? What
not.
was that like for you as you start to gather? Because just by talk when we met briefly at the summit, and then also talking to you here, you really seem like an individual who, once you are interested in a subject, clearly you want to dive in and gather as much information as possible. So, what was that like as you go on this journey and you start having these conversations with family and friends or whoever's around in your inner circle?
Well, when I was following her, I actually kept it a secret for the first year, and I never told anyone because I because there was a part of me that was so ashamed for being so interested and invested in this one female. And actually, shortly after I found out OR 54 went to Lake Tahoe and was the first wolf in that area since 1922, or known wolf. Anyway, uh, my I have a cousins. I sorry, I had some cousins on my mom's side in Colorado that came up to visit shortly after that. And my cousin Skipper, oh, and I just said his name, but I'm sure he won't mind. Um, he took me wolf watching in Yellowstone and did not tell my mother until afterwards because my cousin Skipper said, "Your views on wolves are stupid, they're dumb, they're uneducated, and I'm going to take you out wolf watching so you lose that attitude of yours." And I was just like, okay, because I was unimpressed. And and I still was so unimpressed about the Yellowstone wolves, which was funny because so many people were so fascinated with them that with me that was never the case because I had viewed them as an animal that ruined every like people that I deeply care about. The wolves in Yellowstone to me ruined their lives. That's how I saw them. So I never cared that much for them, at least not for a long time. And afterwards, when my mom found out I went wolf watching in Yellowstone, she was, made it quite clear to him that she was not for it. She was like, "Of course, you're going to sit there and say you like wolves. You're from out of state. You live in the city. You get to sleep well at night in your cozy bed, while us locals have to deal with the consequences year round, 365 days a year." So so again, I was just so terrified of telling anyone. And I finally started to when OR 54 became the second known wolf in Nevada in over 100 years. She crossed the Interstate 80. This was like back in the fall of 2019 and briefly forayed into Nevada. So that's when I started to sort of share, like, hey, I'm following this one wolf. I think you might be interested. And right away, actually, the moment I actually told some of my family, like my mom, my dad, my grandparents, about this one female, um, they were shocked that I had even been following this wolf in the first place. But many of them were shocked there were even wolves in California to begin with, not to mention this one female who I think by this point had traveled like over 6,000 miles by the time I first told them about OR 54. And that really, I think because she really changed everyone's narrative. She broke the narrative that was taught for so long in the family. This was the wolf that barely had gotten into any livestock conflicts, which was the polar opposite of her parents back in Oregon. which at the time, from what I was reading about them, they still kept pretty often killing cattle. At least that's what I perceived it as. She got to California on her own. No one brought her there, which also broke the narrative that wolves were stupid and couldn't get anywhere on their own. Then that's why the feds had to bring them to Yellowstone. And she also broke the narrative that all wolves were the same. This animal clearly was not like other wolves, especially if she's the first wolf in Lake Tahoe since 1922, the second known wolf in Nevada in over 100 years. I mean, and I think everyone was so impressed by her travel patterns because at this point she had walked across 3 different states in her first year to look for a mate, and no one could believe it. No one could believe it. So there was definitely an interest, and she, to everyone that I knew, family, friends, even some who didn't like them still at that point, there was, like me, there was an interest in this young female who had no idea the kind of impact that she was having on the people that I knew in my life.
Yeah, there was almost, it almost seems like there was a respect level that your family saw in this animal, the way that she was able to travel and move about and live as she's a free being just trying to make her way in the world. And it seems as though that is what struck a chord in them, that these wolves are just trying to live and be the best that they can be in the world. And it seems like that was something that really stuck with them.
Hmm. And and I think when she died, and this was February, I got the email notification. This was on February 6th, 2020, and I remember it so vividly. I sobbed and cried for days, and I'm not even kidding when I said that. And it wasn't just about this animal's death, but I mean it was, but it was like I never appreciated how much of an impact she had on me really until the day she died. And I just was overcome with all these emotions, not just like sad or anger, but like grief, uh, guilt, shame, because it was at that point where I realized I was the one who got it wrong about wolves. I was the one that was stupid, and I jumped to conclusions that weren't possibly not true, or that absolutely were not true. And it was the first time I realized that they were not some bad animal, which, you know, it's so hard to believe for some people to like even know what that feeling is like, because it's but because apparently from people that I talked to, it's my story is apparently one that's not often heard about or and whatnot. And I just remember that there was so like it was just like this remorseful feeling of I need to do better. What I thought was not true, and it was devastating for that matter, because I I always liked animals, and here was this animal I was taught to hate for so long. And there was just guilt and shame because I couldn't believe I even thought that way or believed any of that. So it was really a pivotal moment of when the spell was broken. It was the straw that broke the camel's back when it comes to the end of my anti-wolf beliefs, anti-wolf misinformation that I had bought in for so long.
So as you're mourning or remembering her in this moment, where does that now take you? When was the shit? When was the next leap for you, knowing that you wanted to become this ally for wolves? You wanted to study wildlife management. You wanted to go into conservation. What was it ultimately that led to your father not hunting anymore? Or when did those perceptions start to change family wide, or if they have at all?
Well, okay, just quick clarification. In
Sure,
my
sure.
lifetime, my father did not hunt. That was like
Got it.
back
Okay.
when he was 20s, 30s, or whatever, or in his 20s and 30s, I mean,
Yep.
just clarifying point. But as
Sure, sure.
for my journey on becoming the wolf biologist, it was not overnight. I spent the first year really trying to unlearn everything I was taught. And I could see that my family was trying to make an effort because and no one could believe how devastated I was. I mean, it was so unexpected because I never cried over a wild animal's death, much less a wolf of all things. So it was a learning effort, and it was not something that happened overnight because this was like years of like information that I had bought into that was very obviously now looking back not true, but at the time that's all I believed. So I really had to the first year really research and educate myself on what was the actual facts and what was true and what wasn't true that I had heard and learned about wolves. And eventually by 2021, I started getting in touch with people who were wolf biologists or were wolf advocates. Um, in Montana, they were, you know, a year later after OR 54's death, they passed pretty nasty legislation targeting wolves. House Bills 224, House Bill 225, which were sponsored by Paul Fielder, and then Senate Bills 267 and Senate Bill 314, sponsored by Rob Brown. And when that was happening, a fellow wolf advocate I know, Amrik Weiss, who I very much look up to as a mentor, she was telling me about the legislation and, you know, was wanting to know if I was interested in speaking out or fighting back against it. I was so conflicted about it and I went back and forth because in my mindset, because I was still really struggling to, let go of my views, even though it was something I wanted to do, it just was not, it was something that was easier said than done. That what helped eventually cross that barrier to actually speak out for wolves and not against them. There is a wolf advocate, Red Woodson on TikTok. She posted a video about Idaho's anti-wolf laws, and when she did that, I felt like that was the courage I needed to go public about and speak out against Montana's anti-wolf laws, which I will say now, it like the effects and the aftermath of that were shocking even to me because never did I think I would want to be a wolf biologist. But when I was educating myself, it made me really want to learn more about them and to work with them because seeing how much trouble they were in, you know, I because there was a part of me with all the shame and the guilt I felt for buying into this anti-wolf misinformation, it felt like there was something like in my conscience that there was a want to like give back or to help them as a way almost like to say I was sorry for what I believed and what I supported. And that really, I think, what has driven me to really become a wolf biologist and why I'm majoring in wildlife management conservation now to become a wolf biologist is because not only do we need to get to a point where wolves are finally being managed in their best interest while also considering human factors in a bipartisan way, but also avoid what the same fate that I had was taught to believe, which was we need to really start moving away and breaking away from these very negative anti-wolf perceptions because it is so damaging. And I say that from personal experience because you don't want to we don't want a repeat of what happened to me. And I'm not saying that as like a rude, mean way, but I want to avoid others from believing or buying into what I bought into for so long, because it is so devastating and it has very real consequences that, are not great. My mental health was a mess after learning that I was so wrong about wolves. And I was a mess as a person, because I went into this depression spiral literally because the guilt and the shame I felt. I know I keep beating a dead horse with this, but it was so real as far as like how, like, because I understood what I had done. I had bought into this very bad mindset, and the emotions that came afterwards, I honestly was not even prepared for. And I don't want that happening to other people, because you don't want to be someone like me, and that you don't want to be the idiot who buys into what someone says without having any context, without knowing any facts or like truth behind it. Like, you can't just believe what everyone says. You have to like actually figure out the truth and like the facts yourself. And that's something I never did for so long. Part of me because I was afraid to do it. So I think also my message to anyone is, if you're afraid to do something because of what someone because of someone else's beliefs, I say get out of your comfort zone, and that's something I did with my wolf advocacy. I was not comfortable doing that right away, but I did it. And to this day, I do not regret a second from it, because now it's taking me on this crazy journey to want to help wolves. So,
I mean, your message is more powerful, I think, than you give yourself credit for, John, because for you to be able to find the strength or the courage or the sacred timing really to get to where you are right now, it takes a lot. And sometimes it takes individuals or people in groups time to get to these points. And you and I having this conversation right now could influence someone down the road through the airwaves somewhere, that maybe they are struggling with something. It might not be about wolves, it could be about something else. So your message is powerful in that you found your way, like you say, through trial and tribulation and through a lot of emotional heartbreak. But you are a testament to the fact that there is another side to a lot of these stories that some of us have heard. And so I want to commend you for that, for finding that other side, and doing the research and being a beacon really for other individuals. So, I mean, just know that just me listening to you and allowing your story to be heard is huge on that end. So I hope you understand that just from what we're talking about right now.
thank you. I guess honestly, I was really for so long so afraid to even tell people that I used to think the way I did, because I was worried about how they would react, because I had not only rubbed the people who cared about wolves the wrong way for so long, because that I was taught to believe, but to sort of like do this complete turnaround. I wasn't sure people would believe me. I wasn't sure if people would like support what my wolf advocacy even after that, when they found out who I used to be and what I used to think, like, because I did it did rub people I know the wrong way in my personal life, when because some most of my family has been very supportive of like my wolf advocacy, my wanting to become a wolf biologist, but there's definitely been others that were not. I had a family friend who I haven't spoken to him in over a year, because he found out that I liked wolves, wanted to become a wolf biologist, and one of the last things he said was, liking wolves was like liking a cult, or it was like a cult. And he said that the wolves were like the cult leaders, and the wolf worshippers were the cult followers. And I and eventually, because he kept making like these comparisons about like just these negative views about wolves, and I ended up challenging his views. I asked him a question because he's a Christian, and I grew up in a very Christian upbringing myself. I asked him, if wolves were so bad, why do you think God created them? And initially, he could not answer that question, but then eventually he said that the devil did, meaning the devil created wolves. That's what he eventually jumped to as a conclusion. And he basically said, you're on your own. Good luck. I want nothing to do with you now because I did not raise you like this. So that, there was definitely some backlash from my personal life for because I went from hating wolves to liking them. So then I was afraid for people who did like wolves, there would be backlash from them when they found out I used to hate wolves, but now I want to help them. So that it was a struggling to find the right words and the right time to talk about what I went through and experienced. But eventually, I felt comfortable enough to share my story, and that's how I met you. Was because you found out
Yeah,
about my story.
exactly. I mean, let me ask this. And I mean, what was it like when you were at the summit for yourself? Because you were in a room with a lot of legendary individuals who have done a lot for wolves, be it through advocacy, through the government. We're talking about Carter Niemeyer and Casey York and Doug Smith and Kim Bean, Mark Cook. What was it like for you to pick their brains and to share your story? Because it seems as though while the story, I don't know, and prove me wrong if I am projecting at any point, but clearly the story is still fresh. It's still evolving because you're still going through this. But what was it like to share this with them and to have these conversations with these people over the course of those 3 days?
It's funny. A lot of them knew I was anti-wolf, but I've never actually told them the very like personal details. Like for example, Wolves of the Rockies. I wrote this letter to the editor in the Bozeman Daily Chronicle shortly after this fight I had with a family friend, which was the title of it was "Wolves Aren't the Demons Some Make Them Out to Be." That was published in the Bozeman Daily Chronicle back in March 2022. And that was sort of asking the question, if wolves were so bad, why did God create them? And that was literally because of this fight I had with this family friend about it. And so, they know I'm not I am, I was anti-wolf, I mean. And because I did tell them about that, I was honest, but I never really told them uh the more personal details about it because it was something that I was not proud of that and it's not easy to talk about because it's it's a chapter in my life that I'm not honestly I'm not even comfortable with even still it because it was just wrong and no one likes being wrong. I feel like so it I just never bothered to tell anyone really for such a long period of time because I was so, afraid and I there was the shame was almost at times even just unbearable. But, they as I've gotten to know these people better, I finally actually it was mainly so this year where I finally felt like comfortable to admit that yes, this was my upbringing, that this is who I am now, and I'm not that person that I was then, and that has um it feels good to like finally talk about it, because hopefully it because essentially what I have a hope from this interview, in that I've talked to some wolf advocates who have never even believed that someone like me, who was so anti-wolf, could change their views about them. And because something that I really strive for is having conversations with people as a wolf advocate you might not always agree with. That's something I really try to do and strive for, because there might be someone out there too who might hate wolves now, but maybe someday in the future they won't, with these conversations and with, these educational facts or whatever that you tell them and provide them. And that's something that I hope people take away from this interview, is that people can change for the better, and you shouldn't, I guess, turn and look the other way towards someone you might not always agree with.
I agree with you. I mean, Stephen and I have been looking to get both sides of the issue for since we started this podcast, and your story is one of many, and it's just as impactful as the next one. And I mean, you are, as we said at the top, you're majoring in wildlife management and conservation. You're working for California Wolf Watch, so you're educating the public about wolf recovery in Oregon and California. You're talking about other endangered species in California. So clearly this has shifted something in you, that
Mm-hmm.
you want to not only help the animal side but also the people side. I mean, do you feel that as you continue on with your studies, and then we continue with California Wolf Watch, you think this is something this clearly is going to be something that's going to continue for for the foreseeable future?
Yeah, I absolutely see it continuing through the foreseeable future. And actually, currently, um, I hope you don't mind if I quickly talk about this, but one of the things that I've been talking about lately on California Wolf Watch, there's a pretty devastating kill order that's currently ongoing that recently went into effect in Northeast Oregon, and it's targeting the 5 Points pack. And essentially, it allows 4 wolves to be killed up until October 31st of this year. And on my Twitter, I have it pinned, and it's John Marchwick, JohnMarchwick. It's a pinned tweet, and there's a link where I offered resources as to how people can help fight back against this devastating kill order in Oregon. So, and that essentially, a lot more of my work in recent years for California Wolf Watch has been largely, for example, as I highlighted with the 5 Point family killer, was talking about the devastating impacts killers really have. And initially when I was anti-wolf, I always assumed that whenever a wolf killed livestock, it was just the wolf's fault because they were that stupid. And because again, that's how dumb I was. But what I've learned with like the kill orders in Oregon and Washington specifically, for example, they're not effective. And I say that because they only, whenever they enact a kill order in Oregon or Washington, the state's wildlife agencies there, meaning whenever they enact one, they only target some of the wolves in that pack. And that's really does more harm than good, because what happens is that pack just becomes fractured, and it doesn't stop them from targeting prey like livestock. In fact, it only increases the likelihood that they're going to go for something like livestock, because there's less wolves targeting difficult prey like elk. And when you're taking out more of the adult wolves or yearling wolves targeting difficult prey like elk or deer, chances are they're going to go for somebody's livestock. And that's not necessarily good either. It's not good for the wolves, and it's not good for the rancher. So it's important people know about the kill orders and how they work in Oregon and Washington, because there are countless examples in recent years. The Lookout Mountain pack, the Chestnuts pack, the Black Pines pack, and the in Northeast Oregon, and the Togo pack in Northeast Washington, where the state wildlife agencies enacted kill orders, killing some of the wolves in those packs, and they're still killing livestock because all they did was fracture the packs, and they never stopped the wolves from killing livestock in the first place, which was the whole point of the kill order, or that's what they say the purpose is to stop them from predating on livestock, but it doesn't work. And a lot of people don't know that. So that's something I really try, really, as far as my work on California Wolf Watch goes, that's sort of at the moment my main purpose is to really educate people about um, the how these kill orders work, and how really, in all seriousness, it's not a productive form to reduce wolf livestock conflicts.
Yeah, and you're absolutely correct. And I think these are the more information that gets out there, the better, because everybody needs to understand when you fracture a pack like that, you look at it as fracturing a family. And as you've spoken so candidly about your own experience, it just shows when families sometimes can get fractured or things go through in ways that harm other folks inside or other wolves, that information gets, the information doesn't get passed down, and then wolves are more apt to go for cattle when those alpha males or females or the leaders of those packs are taken away. And so that information is vital for people to understand. What's the best way, John, for people to either, if they want to reach out to you? Are you on Instagram? I know you said Twitter. What's a place where they can look at California Wolf Watch in order to get some of the information that you're talking about?
So California Wolf Watch is only on Facebook, but also
Okay.
on my main accounts. I am pretty active when it comes to wolf advocacy, aside from Instagram, because Instagram I'm not on anymore, and I also forgot my password. But my any of my social medias aside from Instagram, Twitter, TikTok, Facebook, John Marchwick, just search that up. And on Facebook, California Wolf Watch, I post a lot of wolf advocacy related issues. And I spread awareness about uh, how people can help, through their wolf advocacy to help wolves, because I know a lot of people want to help, but they don't necessarily know what to do to help. So that's something I really also try and strive for, is give people resources as to how they can help make a difference for wolves through wolf advocacy.
Yeah, 100%. My last question for you, John, is when you hear the word wolf, what is the thing that comes to your mind?
Uh gosh, you know, I the one I really think of the most is uniqueness, because every wolf I think is so unique, and they're all so different. I go to this all the time, but with the wolves in California, you had some there that have come from Oregon, but you've had others that have not come from Oregon. One wolf that really also impressed me, and I learned about her shortly after OR 54 passing, or actually it was a little bit before OR 54's passing, was the Lassen Pack's original breeding female, LAS1F. She walked all the way from Wyoming, biologist thing, to Northern California, and actually established the Lassen Pack, which is still in existence to this day in Northern California. So really, I think the word that really sticks with me with wolves is uniqueness, because they really are so different, and you would never think that had you not known any better. But when you really look into it, they are so unique. They're all so different from one another. And that's something I think that has really kept up with my fascination towards them for now going on several years and hopefully for the rest of my life.
I I think so. I can't thank you, John, for being open and candid with your story and sharing it with me and sharing it with everyone who's going to listen to this podcast. So I thank you for accepting the invitation, to allowing people to hear it. And listen, best of luck in your studies, best in luck of everything that you're doing going forward. And your story is powerful, and it's really wonderful to hear. So I can't thank you enough for allowing me just to be a listener and just to hear your side of everything. So thank you very much for that.
Thank you very much for having me. Your podcast is very great, and I hope you keep it up as well.
We will. We'll do the best that we can. So just stick around for just a minute before we sign off. But
Okay.
House to you all out there, and Stephen, I'll be with you next time. Bye, everybody. Looking for more information about Wolf Connection or the podcast? Please visit our website at wolfconnection.org, where you can donate, sponsor a wolf, or become a volunteer.